with a warm welcome. Good evening, good evening. Thank you for letting me know that there was no sound. We're all in this together. I think that you can, yes, okay, good. You can hear now. So to begin our guided meditation, just to sit and know we're sitting. Feeling the pressure of the chair or cushion against the body. Feeling grounded, connected here. And checking in with the sound. Check it in, you could check it with the sound or with the body. Is there a way that the body might feel a little bit more balanced or connected or here? Is there a warm-hearted, gentle way in which you can just finish arriving in this moment? And it might be that there are areas in the body that have some tension, some tightness. Can we bring a warm-hearted awareness to those areas? Some caring attention. Whether it's a knee or a back, or maybe just tension in the shoulders, around the eyes, around the jaw. Can we allow it to be there? So often we have aversion to these uncomfortable experiences. Of course we do. Can we explore and experiment? What is it like if we don't have the aversion to uncomfortable bodily experiences? Can we greet them? Hello, you again. And bring in that same warm-hearted attention to the sensations of breathing. Feeling the expansion, contraction that goes with inhales and exhales. And when the mind wanders, again, an opportunity for some warm-hearted attention, non-aversion, just noticing the mind has wandered, and begin again with the sensations of breathing. Is there a way in which we can practice mindfulness with an attitude of warmth and care, whatever might be arising? Can we have an open-heartedness? Jack Kornfield describes mindfulness as loving awareness. Can we practice with loving awareness? to meditate with a sense of loving awareness, having an attitude of warmth to our mindfulness. Help support and nourish not only our meditation practice, but our inner life, so that we might show up in the world having this foundation of warm-heartedness, so that our practice might be for the benefit of ourselves, but also for the benefit of those with whom we come into contact, so that all beings may be free from suffering without exception. I feel like tonight's a little bit of comedy of errors. I didn't get the sound right, and maybe you guys didn't notice, but the bell fell off of the where I'm sitting here. So welcome everybody. It's nice to be here. I'm saying here, right? Of course I'm meant to IMC by myself. And I'm imagining that soon we'll be practicing together. I don't know exactly when. There was talk that we were going to open on August 1st, but now it seems that the county might have placed some restrictions asking for mask wearing indoors. So we haven't made any changes to that plan about August 1st, but we might. So keep an eye on the website if you're planning on coming. We might postpone our opening for a little bit. Okay, so today I'd like to continue my discussion of the paramis, these 10 qualities that are often expressed in our daily life, not exclusively, but can be expressed in our daily life as a support for awakening, as a support for liberation, as a support for greater peace and freedom in our lives. And so this word parami, it is related to the meaning of like taken to the farthest, kind of like far and parami are related. So something taken the farthest has a sense of completeness, has a sense of the highest state possible, and that's why sometimes it's translated as the perfections. Sometimes I'm a little hesitant to use this expression, perfections, because implicit in that is imperfection, and we might, like this perfection, it feels like it's just such a high ideal that we might even feel a little bit dissuaded from even working on it at all. But parami, as maybe instead of farthest, we could also understand it as kind of like going further. So developing, growing, like enhancing these qualities. So what are these qualities? It's a list of 10. Generosity, ethical behavior, renunciation, wisdom, energy, patience, truthfulness, resolve, loving kindness, and equanimity. In the first 5, So the next one should be patience, but I'm not going to talk about patience tonight. I'm going to talk about loving kindness, which is the ninth parami. There's a few reasons, and one of it is related to just what I was talking about, how sometimes we hear this idea of perfection. Maybe we don't even notice it. It might be a subtle way in which there might be this, our inner critic might roar itself and say, oh, well, I'm far from perfect, and I'm not even, why should I even bother, or something like this. But loving kindness is a way in which we can meet whatever is arising with some openness, some spaciousness, some ease, some warm-heartedness. So mindfulness and loving kindness aren't exactly the same, but they're related, and as I go through the talk, maybe I'll highlight some of the differences. So loving kindness, as many of you know, is the translation of the word metta. So it's the metta parami. But loving kindness isn't the only translation. We could use goodwill, well-wishing, benevolence, friendliness, kindness, kindfulness, and I've seen a handful of them. And maybe you have your own favorite translation of metta. One way we might understand it is as a heartfelt concern for the welfare and happiness of all living beings. As a parami, it's for all living beings, without discrimination, without reservation, and of course includes ourselves. So the parami is kind of like taken to the farthest. The complete version is to have this warm-hearted wish for the welfare of all living beings. But sometimes, loving kindness, it might feel like it's associated with love, which is a beautiful, beautiful quality. But sometimes love, we might hear this, and it might feel sappy or sentimental or saccharine. And metta isn't sappy or sentimental or saccharine. And so, in fact, some of you might know this, that the near enemy of metta, that is, that which looks like or is a facsimile of, or maybe can pass as metta, but isn't quite metta, is affection with attachment. So it's the warm-heartedness, but it's intermingled with your mine, or this wish for things to be a certain way. Like it's not unconditional. Like, I love you, as long as you behave properly. When you don't behave properly, then I have different feelings. But it's just perfectly natural that loving kindness and attachment are mixed. In this human life, they're different, whereas metta is an offering and attachment is more of a holding. So there's this different movements, an opening and maybe like of a closing. And we might say that the difficulties that we have in our relationships arise from this root of attachment, that is, any possessiveness or rejection or fear that we might have in our relationships are associated with this attachment that is often intermingled with loving kindness. It's perfectly natural to have this, and it's part of the human experience to have this intermingling. So metta as a parami is an encouragement for us to notice, where is this attachment? Where is there some holding? And can we also notice when there's some just pure wish for the welfare and happiness of others? This pure warm-heartedness, goodwill, well-wishing. So in the same way that metta is universal, it doesn't make distinctions, whereas attachment is particular. attached to this person, but not that person. Whereas metta is more of a even radiance or something like this. So in this way, metta is an expression of freedom. It's not an expression of clinging, not an expression of attachment. And since the awakening and freedom is the guide, is the measure, is the goal of parami practice, again, we can use this word goal, we'll hold this lightly, but is the direction of our practice. So metta parami includes those forms of love or goodwill that are characterized by freedom. So it has this quality of freedom associated with it, as opposed to some clinging or some attachment. But clinging also can be expressed as greed or hatred. And loving kindness, of course, is like an antidote to hatred. Or if hatred is too strong a word, maybe ill will, or maybe we can even say aversion. We know that greed and hatred are some of the roots of the defilement. So loving kindness, metta, is some of the antidote, like the opposite, in the opposite direction. We don't simultaneously have this warm-hearted care for somebody at the same time that we have hostility and ill will towards them. And so the eightfold path also has the guide and measure and goal as freedom. And it's not surprising that the eightfold path and the paramis are towards awakening and freedom to support that. And part of the eightfold path is the second step is right intention, wise intention. And part of wise intention is non-greed, non-ill will, and non-harming. So non-greed sometimes can be understood as renunciation, which is another of the paramis. It could also be generosity, perhaps. But non-ill will is often understood as metta, loving kindness. So loving kindness as an intention, as an underlying support for our mental activities, as maybe a substratum, or maybe even just a stratum of the direction our life is going, or when we're expressing the Eightfold Path, when we're practicing with the Eightfold Path, we're not filled with ill will. Instead, there's metta, non-ill will. And then the third aspect of right intention is non-harming, which is compassion. And of course, compassion and metta, karuna and metta, are related. That is, that loving kindness is this warm-hearted wish for the welfare of all beings that's radiating out. And it's just natural that when they're radiating out, it would come into contact with individuals that are suffering. And so that sincere wish for their suffering to end is compassion. So metta plus suffering equals compassion. So in this way, that love, not only metta, but karuna, loving kindness and compassion, are not only a part of the Eightfold Path, but they work together as part of the paramis as well. This wish for the suffering to end, our own suffering and the suffering of others. But ill will also shows up in subtle ways. I'm talking about the Eightfold Path has the intention of, non-ill will, not having hostility, not wanting to harm others, not being angry with others. Sometimes when we're angry, we don't have access to our best wisdom. And sometimes the energy can feel like it's not directed in a way that's wholesome and helpful. So the Eightfold Path includes non-ill will, non-anger. So this is maybe a more obvious way in which ill will might be expressed. But ill will can also be expressed in subtle ways. That is, when we encounter suffering, there's often this tendency to think if we don't have loving kindness already, there's this idea of like, this needs to be different. And whether that shows up like just an uncomfortable sensation when we're meditating. I know for quite some time when I'd meditate, I'd have this sound in my ear, and and it wouldn't go away, and I could just feel kind of like the anger that would like be arising, like, dang it, don't you know that I'm trying to meditate now? I can't meditate with this. In this sense of like hostility and really wanting to push it away. So when there's this, when we come up with difficulties, it might start out as subtle, like, I wish that weren't there. Or it might flare up into something obvious, like anger. But when it's really subtle, there might be of this sense of like, oh, this has to be different. Or maybe there's a sense of irritation or fault finding or having a grudge against something. So just ways kind of the heart and the mind might lean in these directions. So these are like more subtle ways. Or maybe instead of this sense of like, this needs to be different, there's a sense of, I need to be different. If there's suffering, if there's something that's uncomfortable, then I need to be different. And this is a way, also a little bit of a subtle way in which ill will shows up against ourselves. This not sense of not being good enough, this sense of inadequacy, the inner critic just getting a toehold, and then often it can go running. So loving kindness is a way that if we practice with loving kindness and have this intention of loving kindness, is a way in which we might be able to embed in the, I keep on using this word substratum, but I'm not sure that's the right word, in the foundation, in the milieu in which we think in our inner life, is a way in which some of even these subtle forms of ill will can be counteracted and maybe not given the chance to flare up into something like anger or some real inner critic, some self-loathing. Another way in which ill will might show up and which loving kindness or metta can be a support to counteract or to be an antidote is when there's a strong sense of us versus them. Me versus you, me against the world. Whenever there's a strong sense of this separation, there's also this subtle sense of ill will there. With metta, there's not such a strong sense. Of course, we can make distinctions and use discernment, but there isn't that such a strong separation, me versus you, us versus them. And so practicing with loving kindness, practicing with metta, metta as a parami, is a way in which we can soften some of these boundaries that we are making that are being supported by ill will. And instead, maybe allows us to be with the irritating without collapsing, without shutting down, to be with the unfair, to be with the messy. So in this way, metta is also can be a support for equanimity, in which we don't lose our balance, but instead can just be with what's happening and not collapsing into making these distinct separations or just collapsing into numbness. Excuse me here. make sure that I'm pushing all the right buttons here. So, metta as an antidote to ill will, both the obvious ways of ill will, but maybe even really the subtle ways, like the aversion or the creating a strong sense of separation. And the suttas talk about how a heart released with metta is brighter than any acts we might do, or any meritorious acts in particular. And in the time of the Buddha, meritorious acts, that is, things that were done in order to garner merit, were definitely concerned with like separation between individuals and maybe a little bit of attachment. I'm going to do this and that I'm going to have this particular reward. So merit is a little bit more associated with everyday life. There's nothing wrong with gathering merit. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. They're an integral part of the path, but at the time of the Buddha, merit was also associated with ritual sacrifices. Not in Buddhism, but in one of the dominant traditions, the dominant religions of the time. They would do ritual sacrifices of sometimes living beings as a way to please the gods or to garner a particular outcome. So in contrast to these things, the metta, and especially a heart released via metta. Some of you may know in Pali, the word for heart, citta, can also be translated as mind. So the mind released by metta and the heart released by metta. Well, so here's a sutta quote. Just as the radiance of all the stars does not equal a 16th part of the moon's radiance, just saying that the moon, the brightness of the moon is so much brighter than the brightness of the stars. But the moon's radius surpasses them and shines forth bright and brilliant. In the same way, of all the grounds for making worldly merit, none are worth a 16th part of the heart's release by metta. The heart's release by metta surpasses them and shines forth bright and brilliant. This idea of when we have this metta, that it's a beautiful thing, has a luminosity, it has a radiance to it. And part of the reason we might say that there's this radiance is in the same sutta is another stanza, is another verse that says, one who actively develops metta, mindfully and without limit, sees their attachments wane, their bonds become worn thin. So this developing of metta, this cultivating of metta, that mindfully and without limit, so it's that it's boundless, and it's for all beings everywhere, like we would with a parami. We see their attachments wane, so things that we're attached to, there's a softening of this, there's a letting go, and the bonds, the fetters that keep us tied to our difficulties and to suffering become thin. This is the direction we want to go, right, towards greater freedom. So this first line, one who actively develops metta. How do we develop metta? There's a number of different ways. One is just in our daily life, how we can, when we meet people, especially as the pandemic is ending and many of us are moving about in social situations more than we were before, just noticing how we feel when we meet people, that is there a sense, this inner sense of friendliness that we're having? Do we have some warm-heartedness? Or maybe not. Maybe we have some, we're feeling reserved or a little bit held back. Maybe you could have this inquiry of noticing, okay, what does it feel like when there's more warm-heartedness and less open-heartedness. It's perfectly natural, right, in our daily life when we're not practicing loving kindness to have more or less. So how does that feel? How can you tell the difference? What does loving kindness feel like? What does metta, pure metta, feel like? What does it feel like when it's tangled up or associated with attachment? What does it feel like when there's a little bit of aversion, just in our daily life? So that's one way to practice developing metta, is just becoming familiar. How does it feel like? In the mind and in the body. And is there a way can you notice there's ways in which it's more likely to arise? So that's one way. Another is the Metta Sutta. Some of you might be familiar with this. I'm not going to go into detail now, but this is kind of like a beloved chant in our tradition. I believe it's the most common chant, certainly here at probably IMC and maybe Spirit Rock and IMS, but it might also be the most common chant in Southeast Asia as well for Theravada Buddhists. The Metta Sutta, that's about this quality of loving kindness and the cultivating it and showing up in the world with it. And it also talks about how it leads to freedom. So in some ways, kind of like the Metta Sutta is in some ways a guidance of the Metta Parami that leads to greater freedom. So one way to practice cultivating and developing metta is to practice with the Metta Sutta, to chant it, to listen to it, to memorize it, to maybe contemplate it, maybe investigate it a little bit. We don't have to make it complicated. There's been plenty of analysis that's done on of it. If you like, you could, but you could also just very simply listen. There's online, you'll find, if you just put in Metta Sutta chant, you'll find plenty of versions of it, and just see how it feels. So that's a second way in which we can cultivate and develop loving kindness. And a third way, maybe I'll actually just share this story. When I was in chaplaincy training, part of the training was we went to a funeral home, and we found ourselves, there was a group of us that were there, and we found ourselves in a chapel with a casket that had a corpse in the casket. And we were kind of surprised. We didn't know that that was going to happen. It was just us there with this casket. And we kind of like looked at one another, and we weren't quite sure what to do, but we wanted to honor and respect this corpse, this person, that used to be alive, that is now here. And so we chanted the Metta Sutta. It's just kind of an expression of our well-wishing, expression of our warmth, expression of, a way for us to join our voices together and put something out there. So maybe it doesn't make perfect logical sense, but in some way it felt like a beautiful thing to do. So there might be a way in which learning or practicing with the Metta Sutta, it might show up in your life in a way that's unexpected. It might be a support or a resource. Yeah, I'll say there were times early in my meditation practice when I would have difficulties, and I had memorized the Metta Sutta, and I would just chant the Metta Sutta while I was meditating, and it just created a different atmosphere, a different attitude in the mind. So, chanting the Metta Sutta. And then, of course, the third one is, sorry, I'm going to cough here. My apologies. My apologies. I'm not sure why my throat is misbehaving a little bit here. So a third way to practice with loving kindness is, of course, to do loving kindness meditation, metta meditation. Chances are many of you are familiar with this. Maybe I'll just say briefly, there's two ways in which we can do this. One is the sense of just radiating metta, indiscriminately just sending it out. And there's a sutta that talks about this, and I'll just say briefly. One dwells pervading one direction with a mind imbued with metta. Likewise the second direction, likewise the third and the fourth. So above, below, and all around, one dwells pervading everywhere and in every way the entire world with a mind imbued with metta. So just this sense of radiating goodwill out. So kind of like having a sense of just wishing benevolence, doing well-wishing out. And then the second way, which is maybe more familiar, is a little bit more structured and specific, and we would cultivate loving kindness to a particular person, a benefactor, ourself, a friend, a neutral person, a difficult person. And kind of like progressively, in a systematic way, sending loving kindness, using phrases often, to different individuals or categories of individuals. So, two ways to practice. One where you just kind of radiate loving kindness in all directions, and one in which it's kind of like a little bit more specific to individuals. Whichever way, it's all good. It's all good. This way in which we can cultivate and develop metta as a way to support greater freedom and greater ease. So we can have the perfection of metta, in which allows it to wish well-being for all beings everywhere. Thank you.